Welcome to the European Commission, the main executive body of the European Union and the closest thing in the EU to a cabinet of ministers. As the European government, the European Commission is key to grasping how the EU functions day to day. From proposing laws that impact everything from digital policies to environmental standards and enforcing regulations that uphold citizens' rights, its work is at the heart of the European system. Yet, its structure and powers invite ongoing debates about efficiency, democratic representation, and the balance between European and national interests. In this video, we will guide you through the basics of the Commission. Welcome to Cicciaroni. Want to support us to make more of these videos on complex aspects of the EU? You can easily do so by becoming our patron. Every euro helps us. The European Commission is led by one president, currently supported by one vice president, 5 executive vice presidents and 20 other commissioners, creating a college of 27 members. And for those who are paying attention, this of course is no random number, but corresponds exactly to one commissioner per member state. If this seems like a lot of commissioners to you, you're not alone. Having one commissioner per country is often viewed as excessive and inefficient. Critics argue that it leads to overlapping portfolios or roles with limited strategic value, while a smaller commission could improve efficiency and reduce redundancies. And since commissioners do not actually represent their country but work in service of the entire union, it shouldn't matter whether your country gets a commissioner or not. But that's just in theory. In practice, it's apparently still hard to let go of each country having someone in the commission. The 27 commissioners are supported by the staff members from across the EU. These are the infamous EU bureaucrats. And while it's popular to complain about the endless Brussels bureaucrats, there are only around 32,000 of them. That is enough to fill a small stadium, but compared to the number of national civil servants, it's actually a rather small group. For example, the city of Paris alone has more than 50,000 civil servants, while the whole of France has over 3 million. That's more people than live in each of the 7 smallest EU countries. The Commission is housed in the Berlaymont building. A far cry from the White House, Kremlin or the Élysée Palace, it is a rather unspectacular building. Different from those, it is also just an office and not the residence of the European President. Although, during the COVID crisis, President von der Leyen actually lived in the building during the lockdowns, so she could continue working throughout. All commissioners, except the President, are appointed by the European Parliament after they have had public hearings where MEPs can ask them loads of questions. That sounds quite democratic and public. Unfortunately, the reality is a bit less so. The appointment process begins with the European Council, so the leaders of the national governments nominating a president. This happens entirely behind the scenes, with a lot of negotiating, deal-making and horse trading between the different national states. After this backroom process, the president must then secure the European Parliament's approval. While Parliament can theoretically dismiss the candidate, it doesn't really happen. Rather, in order to get their support, the president tends to make promises to the democratically elected groups in Parliament, who use this as a way to push for the things that they and their voters find most important. Once the president is in place, each member state proposes a commissioner and the president assigns them portfolios. Again, neither how these commissioners are chosen by their countries, nor how they are assigned their jobs is transparent. The fact that most national systems are just as untransparent means the EU is no worse, but also no better than the countries that make it up. All these candidates, just like the president, undergo hearings with Parliament and make promises to the different groups to get their support. The interesting thing here is that the Parliament can only approve or dismiss the College of Commissioners as a whole, so they can't remove a bad apple while approving the rest. Although overtly designed to have some merit base, this appointment process is sometimes criticized for being overly political, undemocratic and untransparent. Member states may nominate individuals more for domestic political reasons than for their expertise in EU matters. What's more, in most cases the national parliament is not even involved in the proposal. So it happens that candidates are put forward who have no expertise or experience in a relevant field and even lack the support of the national parliament. Yet they are approved. Once in place, the College of Commissioners meets weekly, usually in Brussels, except during Strasbourg's parliamentary plenaries. Their meetings are essential decision-making moments for the EU. While not open to the public, summaries and minutes of these meetings are available online. So if you are interested, you can read them all. The Commission is the European Union's legislative initiator, which means that only it can draft the vast majority of legislative proposals, which the European Parliament and the Council of the EU can only debate, adopt or reject through the ordinary legislative procedure. As with all things EU, it's not that simple. While the European Commission holds exclusive power to propose most EU legislation, there are key exceptions for sensitive matters where national sovereignty is felt as especially important. For example, in the realm of common foreign and security policy, the Council or the High Representative for Foreign Affairs have the right to initiative. The idea behind the Commission's exclusive right to propose legislation is that it ensures that policy aligns with the overarching EU strategies and objectives, which should make the process more effective and focused. But it is often questioned for putting too much power within one institution and for making the Union less democratic than it should be. Considering all other parliaments in Europe do have the right to propose legislation themselves, it is a very odd choice that the European Parliament cannot. The Commission upholds EU treaties and legislation, ensuring member states adhere to them. If a state fails to comply, the Commission can initiate infringement proceedings. Ultimately, cases can be brought before the European Court of Justice. This is not something that happens overnight, but rather it goes through different steps to make sure the country has plenty of chances to rectify any issues. Only if they are not addressed will it escalate to the Court of Justice. This enforcement power is praised for maintaining or attempting to maintain cohesion and legal uniformity within the EU. However, some detractors argue that it can lead to tensions with member states, who may view these proceedings as overreach that compromises national sovereignty. It's fair to note, however, that all the policies and rules that can be enforced by the Commission are made with the approval of the sovereign states who have signed up to adhere to the rules made in this way, which arguably makes it somewhat opportunistic to call upon national sovereignty whenever a specific rule is not to their liking. Every year, the Commission outlines its priorities for the coming period in the Commission Work Programme. This roadmap guides legislative and policy focus, supporting economic, social, and environmental goals. The President presents this plan for the new year in the State of the Union. This doesn't quite have the flair of the opening of Parliament by a royal as is tradition in many European countries, or the gravitas of the US or Chinese presidents' versions just yet, but it is something. The Commission is responsible for managing the EU's budget. It distributes funds and works with national and regional authorities to ensure that EU policies are carried out effectively. This helps direct resources to projects that support economic growth and unity across the member states. Managing the EU budget gets flack for inefficiencies and risks of fund misuse, especially by member states. Some argue that stronger auditing systems are necessary to improve transparency, and enforcement tools are needed to ensure that funds are allocated and used responsibly. For example, several EU countries have lamented the perceived misuse of the funds by Hungary's government and the lack of disciplinary action to correct it. On the global stage, the Commission acts as the EU's voice. Whether negotiating trade agreements or fostering diplomatic relationships, it ensures that the EU's interests are championed abroad. The Commission also has a seat in some of the world's most exclusive clubs, such as the G7, G20, and the WTO. Notably, the Commission has no seat at the table at NATO or the UN, where it only holds observer status, which means the EU is dependent on its member states in these settings. The EU's outreach is supported by around 140 delegations and representative offices worldwide. These are headed by an EU ambassador, but in typical EU fashion, they aren't named embassies, because that would make things far too easy. The President of the European Commission is pivotal, setting the strategic direction and overseeing the distribution of portfolios. This role grants the President authority to modify portfolios and guide policy. The President's influence strongly shapes the Commission's priorities, both overtly through strategy and more subtly through their power to appoint who is responsible for what and how much agency and independence any commissioner has in their field. With so much power resting with the President, it is perhaps strange that the President is appointed in such an indirect and untransparent way. The European Parliament has previously proposed that the President may only be someone that was the lead candidate for one of the European groups to make it more democratic. Others propose direct elections of the President by the entire European population. So to recap, the European Commission is the EU's executive body responsible for setting the course for the EU, proposing legislation, implementing policy, enforcing EU law, and managing the budget. The Commission represents the EU globally. It works under the leadership of the President and is composed of 27 commissioners, conventionally one from each member state. Despite its central and increasingly visible role, criticisms include inefficiencies, lack of transparency in appointments, and the concentration of power in what is essentially a non-elected body. If you enjoyed this video and would like to learn more about other EU institutions, their functions, and the legislative process, check out our other videos and subscribe to our channel.